this story that grew up in Eastchester, New York. My father was an architect. He built the house, I always say, for me. I don't know about my sister, who was 3 years older, almost 4 years older, because she got no credit for anything. But Jane and I lived with our parents in this house in Eastchester that Daddy had designed as an architect. He designed the house across the street diagonally and below us. Dr. Swift was below us and Dr. Hardy was diagonally across. It was I'm going to say, a fairly affluent neighborhood. Perhaps when Jane was born, maybe before, I'm not sure I was born, my mother went to Europe with her brother, Uncle George, and Aunt Dot. And Aunt Dot was blind, but she never sort of acknowledged it or said anything. And this cluster diamond ring was hers. And George was trying to find some facility that could help her eyesight. And but she was sweet. She was heavy, round, and jolly, she'd take us for lunch and we'd get the menu and she'd have it upside down. She'd say, "Now, what do you think about this? You want a turkey, a sandwich, or grilled cheese, or It was great." And so Mother went to Europe with them, which was I'm really happy about now, because her being an artist and my uncle was in the printing business. But that's nevertheless, then the Depression hit. And we had Birdie. I'm not sure Birdie lived with us. She was a black lady. And there was a room downstairs in this house, and a room and a bathroom. It was Birdie's. And then, as things went from bad to worse, we lost Birdie. And I remember the iceman coming in, because we didn't have refrigerators, we had ice boxes. And they would bring in hunks of ice and put it in your ice box so that you could keep things cool. And Jane and I were in the same room. And I guess I banged my head against the wall and it drove her crazy. That's why she was crazy. But I do remember we had a thing, I don't know what you call it, an archway like they use in weddings, and I think it was for roses or something to grow on. And I used to climb out the window and go down that when I was supposed to be taking a nap. I'd wander around the backyard and I'd always find a penny or a dime or something. And then the Swifts, Dr. Swift and Mildred Smith, lived below us, and they had two girls, Nancy and Sally. And I remember when I was, God, how old was I? Maybe 5, and they had a new baby. So we didn't have fences between properties. We might have a hedge, but no fences. So I went down, because we had porches there, and a porch was not enclosed. It was sort of outside, but was the trend at that time. So I saw the baby carriage outside at the Swifts. So I went down the hill and I thought, I go down and I peek at this baby. I said, "Oh, that's what babies look like, huh? I'm not a baby, I'm 4 or 5, And so I sort of go in to feel, and I sort of lift it up, but not out, just to see what it would weigh. And Mrs. Swift came out the house, and she screamed, seeing me do this. And so I put the baby, of course, down. I had raised it 1/2 inch just to see. And I ran home. I lost my shoe, one of my shoes, and I got home, and Mrs. Swift came over to have talk with my mother. And I sat there and I said, "Oh, I never went on that porch. I never saw the baby. I swear I never saw that baby." Because I was caught red-handed, but didn't want to admit it. But in those days, right across the street from us was a vacant lot. And one of the things that happened to me, before I tell you any more, was they had this stump. And the stump had a beehive in it. And I was, as little girls, we wore dresses. And I remember, I don't know, Tommy and Judy, where they were, but they were the Hardy boy, Dr. Harvey's children. So I sat on the stump. Well, there was a beehive I sat on. So I got up screaming, and Mrs. Harvey came out, grabbed me in the house, and they put mud on my butt, because that takes the poison out. And Tommy walked in the room. He was like 2 years old, and I was mortified. But I remember that because I was so embarrassed. Why at 4 years old would you be embarrassed? I don't know, or 5. And what else was I going to tell you? Oh, I know. In that era, Forbes Boulevard, 13 Forbes Boulevard, I don't think you went by the houses when you went back with your dad. Peter and Bruce have been there many times, and they go in, we go into the house, we talk to the new owners, and we're always welcomed with open arms. But try to think about the last time we were there. And the man across the street just thought we were the greatest, and Bruce corresponded with him for a while. But anyhow, I know, Jane had her tonsils out. Well, if Jane was going to have her tonsils out, I wanted mine out. And of course, she was 3.5 years older than I was, or 2.5, I'm not sure now. And they took them both out together. That was, in those days, your general doctor did that thing. When I broke my arm, I go to my GP, and he fixes my arm. So I remember waking up in my crib, and I started to cry, and I said, "Well, I want my ice cream." And they said, "Well, you were sleeping, so Jane ate it." And I was so angry with her. And to make a long story short, when we lived in Birmingham, Alabama in 1944, 45, I had to have my tonsils removed again. They grew back. And that's another sad story, because my roommate ended up dying, but we'll get to that. So anyhow, we lost the house. At some point, Alice and Jeanette, Aunt Alice worked in Gloversville, New York. She was an art teacher. I never could get her to draw anything for me. I've got a couple of little boxes that she covered with paper, and they're very nice. And Jeanette, I'm not sure she was working in New York City, but I think Aunt Alice was home for the summer. And so they came out and lived with, the family to take care of us and to help pay the bills. And then we finally lost the house. The Swifts lost theirs, and the Hardys lost theirs, even though they were doctors. But there was no building during the Depression. You didn't build a private house. And there's a book back here in the bookcase, hardcover book with some of Daddy's houses in it. Actually, Dr. Swift's house is in there, and our house. And there's another house in there. I've forgotten who it was. And I've got pictures that were in magazines in a folder in the back with pictures of Daddy's houses, and it shows the floor plans. and I'm not sure if it shows who the house was built for. Like the farm, we always called it, was a modified farm that Aunt Dot and Uncle George bought, and they wanted it renovated. You know, it was just an old shack, so that was up in Madison, Connecticut. And so that they did that, and I don't know why. I don't think the Depression could have affected Uncle George. I'm not sure if he was president of the company at that point. He worked for the Dexter Folder Company, and Uncle George lived in New Jersey, and that was up north. But he eventually sold the house in the farm in Madison, Connecticut, and he sold it to Oscar Hammerstein, who was a composer that you probably don't know. But he wrote like Oklahoma and some of the musicals. And let's see what else. Oh, then another house that Daddy built in Harrison, New York, which I have lots of pictures for. That was the Hoey house. And it's German, and I don't know if it's Hoey or what it is. Because you know, when you're 6 years old or something, you don't know how something's spelled and you don't care. In other words, if I'm 6 years old, how do you spell Valerie? I don't care. So we used to go there every Christmas, and they would have a tree, and because they were German, they had real candles on it, and it was always decorated beautifully. And the thing about the house was there was one section here and another main section here, and then an archway, and there were rooms there too over the bridge. And so you drove in the backyard to park under this thing. And we'd go there and have tea and cookies. And I remember distinctly, good old Audrey, she was such a good kid, that she offered me cream, or did I want lemon in my tea, or did I want sugar? Cream. And I said, oh, I'll have both. Well, of course, they curdle. And my mother looked at me and she said, you wanted it, you drink it. So I drank this combination. Oh, but to get back to the tree, they would light the candles for us. You know, and then they'd turn them off. Mm-hmm. But they were very nice. And then eventually, I think that's when we had moved. I'm not sure. It was in Harrison, New York. They sold the house to Johnny Carson. And I have a picture that, I don't know if Bill has ever seen it, but I know Peter and Bruce have. And it shows Johnny Carson in a convertible with his three boys outside this arch where you can park in the backyard. And but Daddy built houses for very wealthy people and nice people, you know, not like I'm living in now, not a tract house, but, you know, a nice one. And it was unfortunate because then we moved to an apartment in Pelham, New York, which I thought was the greatest. In those days, you had walk-ups. We were up on the 4th floor. And it was a 2-bedroom apartment, but it was quite large. It had a nice entranceway and a little kitchen, and you know, it had a nice living room. And let's see, wait a minute. I think Mimi was in California, so at first we stayed in her apartment in Pelham, New York. And that was kind of unacceptable. There was 1 bedroom. And then the other big room off that was kind of a crazy bedroom where I slept. And I guess my cousin Suzanne, when she was younger, slept there. They had a house at one time in Pelham on Sherman. Sherman Way, I think it was, something like that. It was off Wolf's Lane, I remember that. And I remember that's where I broke my arm. They had, like 4 steps up to the level of the yard, and then they had not a railing, but on the side they had it filled in with a little sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, but shelf and I decided to walk up that. And of course I slipped and fell and broke my arm, and my sister said I did it on purpose to get attention. We were not the best of buddies. And so then, anyhow, that was the Swifts. No, that was Mimi's house. Mimi was Mother's sister. Her name was Emma Esther Heinzman Witten was her married name. And for some reason, Mimi, I called her Mimi, that's how it started, because I didn't like Emma. And as a kid, I don't know how I came up with Mimi, but Emma, I don't know. So she's known all over as Mimi to all her friends. Uncle Harold, they lived in this apartment, and it was diagonally across from the church I went to, the Huguenot Memorial Church, which was Presbyterian. And I'd go over there after Sunday school, because I don't think when you're little you go to church. I don't know, but I didn't go to church very often. I went to Sunday school. I went over there, and Uncle Harold would sit me down, and he'd read the funnies to me. I'd sit on his lap or next to him. And Suzanne was so much older that I didn't have that rapport with her. And then, well, I was sort of horrified when actually she went to a dance in Pelham and met this dashing, I've got a picture of Sam someplace, he was in the Navy, and Suzanne wanted to get married, and nobody was good enough for my kids. And then his family was from Stockton, California, where Bill went to school, to grad school. And so Mimi Uncle Harold had passed away, and I'm not sure what of. But I was afraid of Mimi too. I used to hide behind mailboxes and hope she wouldn't see me. I don't know why, but anyhow. So, where was I now? I can't remember what I was saying. I got off track. But anyhow, Mimi was kind of a snob. She asked her brother, Uncle George, she asked George for money to help her support herself because she didn't want to work. And she finally got a job. In those days, things were different. She answered the phone for a bunch of businesses or people. And we were not to tell anybody that she worked because only common folk worked. Mother had been the designer of all these wonderful, wonderful pictures. But when you get married, in those days, you didn't work when you had children. So I'll get back to that too. So then we were talking about Mimi's apartment, which was very convenient. So we moved in there for the time being, and our things were still in storage because we had stored our furniture and our things when we moved to West Point, Mississippi, because there was no building, and Daddy was too old for the Army. And he was building a munitions plant in Tupelo, which is where Elvis Presley's from, by the way. And Mississippi was a straight road. You go right down the road. I don't even think it bends a little. and you turned to the right, it was Tupelo. You turned to the left, and it was Columbus Air Base and Mississippi State. And I had a great time there. You know, kids are nice to other kids. I'm not saying they didn't treat my parents that well. Mother would roll bandages with them. You know, in those days, I have a picture in one of these albums of Mother in her uniform, her first aid uniform, and they would go back to, say, Valerie's house to have tea after they rolled bandages. Everybody was invited except my mother. We were considered foreigners. You know, if you lived in Illinois, maybe you were a Yankee. But we weren't even a Yankee, we were foreigners because we were from New York. And I do remember on the ride home from Pelham, no, we had moved at that point. There was an attorney that we knew, Judge Scott, in Pelham, where Mimi's apartment was. And they were trying to get us out of Mimi's apartment. And we were saying we were blood relatives, because in those days they had, what's the term? You couldn't raise the rent on family members. So we went before Judge Scott. We knew him, and so of course we won. We got to stay in the apartment. And then Mother and Daddy found another apartment in the next town of Mount Vernon. And you walked like 1 block or 2 blocks. You passed over a bridge, which was the Hutchinson River Parkway. And then that was Pelham. So when we lived there, we walked, you know, over the bridge and down to the railroad station, the Pelham station, because we were too far from the Mount Vernon one. And it's unfortunate, when they first made the move, was in 1950, I believe. I'm pretty sure that's when it was. And Jane and I had secretly planned to go to Europe together. Jane was going with her idiot sister, who's so stupid that she doesn't know right from left. And so we finally had to tell Mother what we were doing. And of course, we couldn't help her move. And I was working for the airlines, and I made $125 a month. And I remember I was good with money then, and I had saved my money, and I wrote my mother a check for $100 and left it for her. I never said anything, but that was to help her move, which in those days was a lot of money. And then Jane and I went over on the, I guess the QE2, or I'm not sure. We went over on Queen Elizabeth and came back on the Queen Mary, something like that. And we were over there for 2 or 3 months. Well, I don't know what we thought we were going to do. But we met Uncle George over there, and he was over there on business with Mr. Baker, who we knew, a family friend, and he worked for George's company. And George at that time was president of the Dexter Folder Company. And of course, World War II was over at that point. And so we ended up, did we go to London first? I can't remember. But I remember in 1950, the room was kind of dirty. The tub had never been cleaned. You know, they were recovering because London had the terrible bombings. And then we went to Paris, and somehow we met Uncle George. In those days, you didn't have cell phones. I don't know if you even had telephones, but that's not true. And everything was done by American Express. Mother would write to me at American Express, and we would write to her from there. And it was a big room, and all the foreigners, that was their central post office and their way of communicating. Mother could write to us at American Express. and we could write to her, and we'd mail it from American Express. In those days, I think stamps were very expensive. I don't know if we could have phoned New York or not. I really don't. And that was 1950. But we met Uncle George, and excuse me, he said he would take us to Switzerland. And oh, we were so excited. But we had a wonderful time in Paris. We really did. You know, we went to all the museums. We went side streets. And then what was that guy's name? He was Creep, that's all I can say. His father owned a Cadillac agency in Dallas. And, that was another trip, so we'll let that go. But, Jane and I we could only afford one dinner, so we'd go. And of course, dinners at 9 or 10 o'clock, and we were ready for bed. But we'd have like a croissant and coffee or hot chocolate for breakfast, and then we might have some cheese and bread for lunch, and then we'd get this onion soup that was so divine for dinner. And I know they thought we were crazy. I'm sure that, you know, these kids that going around that don't know what they're doing. But so George called us, and something had come up, and he wasn't going to be able to take us to Switzerland. So we went down to have dinner with him. He was at a ritzy hotel. I think it was the Continental, which was quite a ways from where we were staying. Jane, she was never a good math student, had made the arrangements for us to stay on the Champs-Élysées, which is the main drag. What was the name of the hotel? And this hotel, and she multiplied instead of divided something, and it was like $10 a day. Well, we had $100 for 2 months. And I said, we've got to get the hell out of here, you know. And they provided lunch, breakfast and lunch and dinner. Well, we didn't want that, you know, we wanted to be wandering around. So somehow, good old Audrey, I don't know how, but ran into this friend of mine who had just gotten married on her honeymoon, Grace McKenna and Frank Henry. And he had just graduated from Princeton as an engineer, and she was a model. And I had lots of pictures of her. And I dated her brother for a long time, on and off. And there were 3 girls and 1 boy. And 1 girl had brown hair, 1 had blonde, and 1 had red, of the girls. And their father had been in the newspaper business and just collapsed and died one day in New York, so Mrs. McKenna had to support these kids. So they were not happy that Gracie was getting married to this older man, so to speak, when she was 18. So when they saw me, Frank was, Audrey, I'm so happy to see you. She actually was so nervous when they got there. She was constipated, and she was so happy to see me. So we went around and we saw they stayed at the California Hotel. Probably not there, but it was not too far around the corner from where we were staying. And so we went up to their room, and they had their own bathroom. They didn't have to go out in the hall or something. And we were very impressed, and they were playing like, I'm guessing, $2 a day, although Frank had lots of money. His parents owned the telephone company in Sandusky, Ohio. So anyhow, we did some things with them, and then we told them about our hotel. So they went with us when we found this, I don't know whether she rented rooms or not, but it was around the corner from them, and it was still not far from the main drag, Champs-Élysées. And you walked upstairs that twisted, and as it curved up the stairs, there was a bathroom off this curve. So you had to go to the bathroom, so you'd go there where the curve was, and you'd say, God, I hope somebody doesn't come downstairs right now, and you try and hold it so nobody can hear you. It was so funny, it really was. But that was, I don't know what we paid. I think we paid 50 cents a day or $1 for both of us. And Uncle George took us out for dinner one night up in the Montmartre. And the Montmartre was the artist community. You know, Toulouse-Lautrec and Braque and Picasso and Monet, and they were all, that's where they lived and worked. And it was kind of a nice place, you know, to see. And not with George, but you could go up there and go into these restaurants where they'd be singing and they'd have, you know, big table, and you'd sit at the big table with other people and have a glass of, they were big on red wine, and neither Jane nor I drank wine. And so, but we'd nurse it along, because I don't think they served anything else. And so Uncle George said he'd take us up there, so we went to a nice restaurant, you know, where the white folks go. And then we were getting home, and it was almost 11 o'clock at night, or almost 12. He said, don't tell your mother I kept you out this late. She'll have a fit. And so he said, well, I'll drop you at the hotel. We said, oh, well, no, you go to your hotel, and then we'll take the subway. No, I'll drop you at your hotel. Well, we didn't know what to do, so he drove up the street. He said, well, where is your hotel? He said, we said, over there, you know, not a light shining, not a light, nothing. And it didn't look like a hotel, it certainly wasn't. You know, there was just a door. And he said, you're staying there? And we said, yes. He was horrified. So we had to ring the doorbell. Finally, some lights came on, and finally they opened the door for us. He gave us, I think he gave us each $50. At that point, he was worried about us. You know, so then we went to bed. And then Uncle George did whatever reason he couldn't take us to Bern, Switzerland. We decided to take this, they called it a ligne bus. Now, I don't know if that's French or what. But it left from Paris, and, well, how did we get on the train? Maybe we took a train someplace to pick it up, because I know we were on a train at some point, and this was 1950. And when you're on the train, they check your passport, and they ask you where you're going. And he looked like a soldier. I was sure he was a Nazi that was still around. And I said, ask my sister. He said, I didn't ask her, I asked you. I said, Jane, where are we going? And she said, Bruxelles. He said, I didn't ask you. He said, looking at the passports, he said, you two are sisters? Jane had the brown hair, the brown eyes, was short and stocky, and I was tall and skinny with blonde hair and blue eyes. And we said, yes. I was scared to death. And Hamburg was just, you couldn't believe it. It was so bombed out from World War II. It was just terrible. And then we went up to Brussels, and we went up to Copenhagen and in Denmark, and we had a really very nice trip. And then we turned around, came back, and when we got back, George called, and his plans had been revised, and he was going to take us to Bern, Switzerland. Well, we were very excited because Switzerland was very expensive at that time. I'm sure it is now, because it's the one country that did not get into the war. It stayed neutral. So there were American troops there and German troops, but it was neutral, so there was no conflict. I mean, they weren't shooting each other. So, so we get to Bern, And oh my God, we had this nice room and we had a bathroom with a bathtub. And we were going to meet George for dinner, and I said, who gets it the first hour? So Jane, I think, got it first, and then she had to clean it out, but she got it in the bathtub. We hadn't had a bath in a month. You know, we a little cleaning here and there. So we're scrubbing, you know, getting the dirt off. Then I got in, you know, it was nice and warm. We got rid of that water. So that was a lot of fun. Oh, we did take a bath well, that was another trip, but we were so excited. So anyhow, then George had us take a trip in a car that he rented. And we went down to Italy, and he had us, the driver took us through the St. Gothard Pass, and we went to Milan, and then we came down through another pass. I've forgotten what it was. St. Gothard and, well, anyhow, but we had a lovely trip, and the taxi driver or the chauffeur, you know, gave us a tour as well, you know, because this took several days. And we went down to Milan, and we could see some frescoes that Michelangelo had done. And we just really had a good time. And then when we got back to Paris, what did we do? I know I think he gave us $100 each or something. You know, here we were planning on living over there for several months on $100. So we were rich. And then we got down to, oh, that was another trip. But anyhow, we spent several months in Europe. Maybe I'll get back to that at some point. But we had a grand time. And then when we got home, Mother and Daddy had moved to Mount Vernon. And Mimi had given up her apartment to go live with Suzanne, because Suzanne was having a second child, and nobody can take care of two children. So she had to be there and live with them. And of course, we were all rolling our eyes thinking, oh, poor Suzanne. You know? And we were saying, lots of people, you know, have lots of children and they survive. So anyhow, that was that. And so they would come back every once in a while to visit Mimi and Suzanne. And then they had a baby, which was Melissa. And Melissa had the most unusual red hair. When I came out to see them, I wasn't that close to Suzanne at that point. But I flew out. They were at a conference in San Diego, and we had made some arrangements. I would meet them at the hotel, and this was a hotel on the beach that's very famous, and I've seen it 100 times.
Hotel Del?
Yes. And so that's where they were staying. So I took a cab from the airport there. Was a little horrified because I think it cost me $20. You know, at that time, it was a lot of money. So then we drove up the coast, and you know, they pointed out different things, and then I stayed with them in Salinas, because of course, Mimi, there was nothing worse than a school teacher. You might as well be a janitor in a subway than be a school teacher. That was the scum of the earth in her view. And one of her friends, I laughed, she said, I remember when she got married and she showed me the black nightgown she had gotten. I'm sure that as soon as Mimi arrived, the black nightgown was thrown out. You know, Mimi was such a prude. But, you know, nevertheless. And then when she had Sonny, of course, you know, she had to stay there. And we're not sure where Sonny is, but that's a long story. That's Melissa's sister. Suzanne is her real name, but she's called Sonny King. And she's, well, she she's really a psychiatrist. She went to, where did she go to school? Melissa went to Stanford and graduated 3 years, Phi Beta Kappa, and then she got an MBA at UCLA, and then she worked. And I remember she met Angelo when they were both working for Xerox, and I don't know where his undergrad was, but he had gone to, Massachusetts, what's the big school there? It's not MIT, it's, and the one you'd really want to go to get an MBA. But anyhow, what in the hell is the name of it? I can see the campus. Well, anyhow, so they were sort of, similar education. But, just so you're aware of it, I don't think it's any secret. Angelo was part black, and he was adopted. And his sister was very black. She looked like a Negro. She was heavy, and she had the curly hair. And she was quite a bit younger than Angelo. And along the way, Angelo tried to help her, but he had to keep her out of jail. For 2 years, her mother had died. She was cashing and using the mother's Social Security check. And so anyhow, that's another story. But I do remember when your dad lived with Melissa and Angelo before they had children, when he was doing an externship and for his pharmacy. No, his first job after he graduated from UOP. He was working at a veterans hospital in Los Altos or someplace up there. And he hardly saw Angelo and Melissa because they were both working. It was before children. And oh God, I'm getting so mixed up in time. But Bill had a BMW at that point. Peter always had to have. He had this motorcycle and that motorcycle. And I said to Bill, we had a long discussion about it. Peter had wanted a street bike. And I said, there's no way you're getting a street bike. You wanted a dirt bike. You still owe for the dirt bike. You haven't paid that off. You can't have a street bike until you pay that off. He was in high school, and they worked at Stalino's restaurant. So I was going to Harbor College, and I came home, and the garage doors open, and there's Peter and Dad standing by the street bike. I was so, it wasn't something that surprised me. I mean, we discussed it, and we agreed no. So I said, I don't know what I said to them. I said, I don't want to speak to either one of you for the rest of the week. And I didn't. I was so angry. So I don't know. The first year in college, Bill did not have a car when he was going to UCSD. And I would go down there. I went down a lot and visited him. And Bruce and I would go, and Bill would show Bruce where the great skateboard places were. And we'd take him out for dinner or lunch or whatever. And then I'd drive back. And so sometimes he came by bus, and that was a nightmare because it came in at Long Beach, and it wasn't a very nice place. And I would sit there horrified waiting for this bus from San Diego. And so that summer, I said, we're getting a car for you. So Bill and I wanted Peter and Dad to go because I don't know anything about cars. We went out, and Bill and I went to every Toyota dealer we could find, or, used car, and I think we wanted a Toyota. They really are a fabulous car. So we found this secondhand blue one, and we liked it. So it was in Long Beach. So I said, Bill, I said to the guy, we will be back in 2 hours at least. I said, I'm going to go home and get my husband and my son and have them look it over. Because I don't know anything about it. And Bill didn't know anything about cars either. So I stayed home, and they went and decided to buy it and brought it home. And Bill worked on it and cleaned it up, put a radio in it and everything like that. What happened to that car? I guess it must have gotten fixed. But I know he was coming from Hermosa. That's what we called Hermosa Beach. He had been surfing there. And I know no, that wasn't the time. One time they stole his UCSD sweatshirt with the keys to the car in it. And he couldn't get home when he was surfing in Hermosa. I don't think that was this time. No, it wasn't. And so he called me to come down. I don't know whether I had another set of keys or to pick him up or what. And he had his surfboard. And your father is a nice-looking young man. He's good-looking today. But, when I'm saying when he's 20 years old, he didn't look like a gangbanger or something. Nobody would lend him a dime to call me on the telephone. So he finally said to one place, I'll give you my surfboard just for a dime so that I can call my mother. And so the guy finally gave him a dime. And he called me to come down and pick him up. And then we finally got this car going and home. But then another time, he was surfing down there. And there's a stop sign at Avenue C in Catalina. And Bill said he was driving along, and, there's like 3 cars in front of him at the stop sign. And he said he looked in the rearview mirror, and he said, I saw it coming. This guy in a sports car was not going to stop. So at least Bill was prepared, because the guy hit Bill, who hit the next guy, who hit the next guy. And, I don't think the car was destroyed, but I think we had to get it fixed or something. But he was devastated, because that was his first, real something that he needed. So let's see. Then, I know. Well, to get back to Bill's car, we'll get back to other people, but we used to go skiing. Lilo Ford, who you saw a picture of her the other night. She had a house up at Twain Harte, and we'd go up there and stay at her cabin and ski. So ex-Bill and I were separated, and so I took the boys up there for Christmas. And we got up there, and I know, I had the wagon. And ex-Bill came over. He had traded. He said to Bill, your husband could be very naive, your dad. And he had traded cars with his dad, who had this BMW, for his Toyota. Or the Toyota, you sell it and then you give me the money, his dad. His dad wasn't willing to give him anything. But the BMW had dry rot, and the speedometer didn't work, and the gas gauge didn't work. I mean, it was a bad investment for Bill, but his dad was doing something for him. So when we were getting to leave, ex-Bill came over, and he was standing in the driveway, and he said, Bill, if you give me your keys, I'll get the car fixed while you're away. Oh, great. Well, Bill didn't give him the car keys. He gave him all his keys. And I had just had the locks changed. I don't know if Bill fixed the car or not. I don't remember. But I know he went through the house like gangbusters. And my neighbor said, you know what, they couldn't say anything. It's his house. But I was angry. But anyhow, we'd go up to Twainhart, and I remember we were there one Christmas, and Lila said, oh, I don't want to see a dead bird. I don't want to see a turkey. So I had to cook the turkey, and we fixed everything. And they called Bruce Pyro because there was lots of wood, and he was always feeding the fireplace. We'd always say, no more wood. You know, you have to let it die down. But he was known as Pyro. And I got them skiing lessons, and ex-Bill had never believed in lessons, which was a good thing because they did learn a lot. You know, just the basics, you know, how, because it's very hard to teach your own child. It's like Nancy being a piano teacher. For the boys, she got them lessons with somebody else. So anyhow, let's see, I'm going to turn this off.
Okay.